Cloudtts. Walking in the Footsteps of the Buddha. Author Thich Nhat Hanh. Book 2. Chapter 48. Covering Mud with Straw. Venerable Moggallana suggested a meeting take place between the Buddha's senior disciples at Jetavana and the principal instigators of the Kosambi conflict. The goal of the meeting was to learn from the experience in order to come up with ways to prevent such conflicts from taking place again. Venerable Mahakassapa presided over the meeting. To begin the meeting, Mahakassapa asked Anuruddha to repeat the 6 principles of harmonious living that the Buddha had expounded during his stay at Eastern Bamboo Forest. After hearing Anuruddha explain the 6 principles, Moggallana suggested that bhikkhus and bhikkhunis in all monastic centers be asked to memorize them. After 4 days of discussion, the bhikkhus in the meeting formulated 7 practices of reconciliation to be used to settle disputes within the Sangha. They named these 7 methods Saptadhikarana Samotha. The first practice is Samukha Vinaya, or face-to-face sitting. According to this practice, the dispute must be stated before the entire convocation of bhikkhus, with both sides of the conflict present. This is to avoid private conversations about the conflict, which inevitably influence people against one side or the other, creating further discord and tension. The second practice is Smrti Vinaya, or remembrance. In the convocation, both parties involved try to remember from the beginning everything that led up to the conflict. Details should be presented with as much clarity as possible. Witnesses and evidence should be provided, if available. The community listens quietly and patiently to both sides in order to obtain adequate information to examine the dispute. The third practice is Amudha Vinaya, or non-stubbornness. The monks in question are expected to resolve the conflict. The community expects both parties to demonstrate their willingness to reach reconciliation. Stubbornness is to be considered negative and counterproductive. In case a party claims he violated a precept because of ignorance or an unsettled state of mind, without actually intending to violate it, the community should take that into account in order to find a solution that is agreeable to both sides. The fourth practice is Tattvabhijya Vinaya, or voluntary confession. Each party is encouraged to admit his own transgressions and shortcomings without having to be prodded by the other party or the community. The community should allow each party ample time to confess his own failings, no matter how minor they may seem. Admitting one's own faults begins a process of reconciliation and encourages the other party to do likewise. This leads to the possibility of full reconciliation. The fifth practice is Pratijnakaraka Vinaya, or accepting the verdict. When the verdict is reached, Jnaptikacha Thinkamavekana, it will be read aloud 3 times. If no one in the community voices disagreement with it, it is considered final. Neither party in dispute has the right to challenge the verdict. They have agreed to place their trust in the community's decision and carry out whatever verdict the community reaches. The sixth practice is Yad Bhuyasikya Vinaya, or decision by consensus. After hearing both sides and being assured of the wholehearted efforts by both sides to reach a settlement, the community reaches a verdict by consensus. The seventh practice is Tranastaraka Vinaya, or covering mud with straw. During the convocation, a venerable elder monk is appointed to represent each side in the conflict. These are high monks who are deeply respected and listened to by others in the Sangha. They sit and listen intently, saying little. But when they do speak, their words carry special weight. Their words have the capacity to soothe and heal wounds, to call forth reconciliation and forgiveness, just as straw covers mud, enabling someone to cross it without dirtying his clothes. Thanks to the presence of these elder bhikkhus, the disputing parties find it easier to release petty concerns. Bitterness is eased, and the community is able to reach a verdict agreeable to both sides. The Buddha's senior disciples submitted the 7 practices of reconciliation for his approval. He praised their work and agreed that the practices should become part of the formal precepts. The Buddha remained at Jetavana for 6 months before returning to Rajagaha. He stopped to visit the Bodhi tree on the way and entered Uruvela to visit Svasti's family. Svasti was 21 years old. The Buddha had returned to fulfill his promise to welcome Svasti into the Sangha when he was old enough. Svasti was ordained and fast became Rahula's closest friend. Chapter 49. Earth's Lessons. Svasti listened with great interest to all that Assaji and Ananda recounted about the Buddha's efforts to spread the Dharma. Bhikkhuni Gautami and Rahula listened intently too. Ananda's memory was truly phenomenal. He filled in many details that Assaji forgot to mention. Svasti was grateful to both bhikkhus and to Bhikkhuni Gautami and novice Rahula. Thanks to them he learned much about the Buddha's life he could never have learned otherwise. Svasti hoped that he would always be able to live close by the Buddha in order to witness his life and receive his teachings directly. Thanks to Sujato, even though Svasti was an untouchable buffalo boy, he had learned the basics of a young man's education. But his lessons with her had ended several years ago when she left Uruvela to marry a man in the village of Nadika. Svasti knew that he could learn a great deal from Rahula. He found Rahula's bearing full of gentle dignity. Not only was Rahula from a noble caste, but he had spent the past 8 years living in the serene and concentrated atmosphere of the Sangha. Compared to Rahula, Svasti felt rough and awkward. But his feelings caused him to devote great efforts to his practice. Sariputta asked Rahula to show Svasti basic practices such as putting on the robe, holding the begging bowl, walking, standing, lying down, sitting, eating, washing, listening to Dharma talks, all in mindfulness. A bhikkhu memorized and paid diligent attention to 45 practices, all of which helped to deepen his focus and serenity. In principle, Rahula was still only a novice, a samanera. He had to wait until he was 20 years old to take full vows. A samanera had 10 precepts: do not kill, do not steal, do not engage in sexual relations, do not speak falsehoods, do not drink alcohol, do not wear jewelry, flowers, or perfume, do not sit or lie down on any wide, high, or fancy bed, do not participate in secular dancing and singing parties, do not handle money, and do not eat past the noon hour. The 45 practices were followed by ordained bhikkhus, but Rahula was expected to study and observe them in preparation for his full vows. A bhikkhu observed 120 precepts, which included the 45 practices. Rahula told Svasti that additional precepts would probably be added, and that he had heard they might well number 200 or more in time. Rahula explained to Svasti that in the first years of the Sangha there were no precepts. Ordination was simple. A person had only to kneel at the feet of the Buddha or another bhikkhu and recite the 3 refuges 3 times. It became necessary to create and enforce precepts as the Sangha grew, because in so large a community there were bhikkhus who needed rules and guidelines in order to better discipline themselves. Rahula told Svasti that the first person to violate the spirit of the Sangha was a bhikkhu named Sudina. It was because of Sudina that the Buddha created the first precepts. Before he was ordained, Sudina was married and lived in the village Kalanda on the outskirts of Vesali. When he heard the Buddha teach, he asked to be ordained. Shortly after that, he had a chance to return to Kalanda. His family invited him for a meal in their home and he consented. His family implored him to return to secular life and help run the family business. He refused. His parents complained because Sudina was their only child and they had no one to inherit the business. They feared that the family's wealth would fall into someone else's hands. Seeing Sudina's determination to remain a bhikkhu, his mother suggested that the least he could do was to leave a child as an heir. Persuaded by his mother's pleas, and without precepts to guide him, he agreed to meet with his former wife in Mahavana forest. His wife conceived and gave birth to a boy they named Bihaka, which means seed. Sudina's friends taunted him by calling him Seed's father. The reputation of the Sangha was tarnished. The Buddha called the bhikkhus together and chastised Sudina. Because of this incident, formal precepts were instituted. It was decided that whenever a bhikkhu violated the spirit of the way of enlightenment and liberation, a convocation would be called and a new precept added. The precepts were called patimokkha, for precepts were considered cardinal. The violation of any one of these resulted in being expelled from the community. All the other precepts could be forgiven by making confession. The 4 cardinal precepts were: do not engage in sexual relations, do not steal, do not kill, and do not claim to have attained insight you have not actually attained. These 4 precepts were called parajika. Rahula also told Svasti that the Buddha had never treated him with special favors even though his father dearly loved him. He recalled how, at the age of 11, he told a fib to Sariputta because he was afraid of being scolded for running off and playing when he had other duties. He ended up having to tell 4 fibs in a row for fear that Sariputta would uncover the truth. But as is almost always the case, the truth came out. The Buddha used this occasion to teach Rahula how important it was always to tell the truth. At that time Sariputta and Rahula dwelled in Ambalathaka Park, not far from Bamboo Forest, where the Buddha was staying. One day the Buddha paid them a visit. Rahula set out a chair for him and brought him a basin of water to wash his hands and feet. When the Buddha was finished washing, he poured out most of the water in the basin. He looked at Rahula and asked, "Rahula, is there a little or a lot of water in this basin?" Rahula answered, "There is very little left." The Buddha said, "You should know, Rahula, that a person who does not tell the truth has as little integrity left as the water in this basin." Rahula was silent. The Buddha poured out the remaining water and asked his son, "Rahula, do you see how I have emptied all the water out?" "Yes, I see." Those who continue to tell untruths lose all their integrity just as this basin has lost all its water. The Buddha turned the basin upside down and asked Rahula, "Do you see how this basin is turned upside down?" "Yes, I see." If we don't practice correct speech, our integrity is turned upside down just like this basin. Don't tell fibs even in jest. Rahula, do you know why one uses a mirror? Yes, a mirror is used to look at one's reflection. Just so, Rahula. Regard your own actions, thoughts, and words just as a person looks into a mirror. Rahula's story made Svasti more deeply aware of the importance of right speech. He could recall times he had fibbed to his parents, and even once to Sujato. He was thankful he had never lied to the Buddha. Actually, it seemed impossible to lie to the Buddha. Even if someone did, the Buddha would surely be able to tell. Svasti thought to himself, "I will resolve always to speak the truth to everyone I meet, even the smallest child. This will be the way I can show my gratitude to the Buddha for all he has done for me. I will observe the precepts diligently." Twice a month, on new moon and full moon days, the bhikkhus gathered to recite the precepts. Each precept was read aloud, and then the community was asked if anyone had failed to keep that precept. If no one spoke, the next precept was read. If someone had violated the precept, he stood and made a confession to the community. With the exception of the 4 parajika, confession was enough to make amends. On many days, Svasti was asked to join the Buddha's group for begging, joined by Sariputta and Rahula. That retreat season, they dwelled in the hills near the town of Ekanala, south of Rajagaha. One afternoon, as the bhikkhus passed by rice fields near Ekanala, they were stopped by a wealthy farmer from a noble caste named Bharadvaja. He owned several thousand acres. It was the season for plowing, and he was out directing the efforts of hundreds of laborers. When he saw the Buddha pass by, he stood directly in his way and said with some contempt, "We are farmers. We plow, sow seeds, fertilize, tend, and harvest crops in order to eat. You do nothing. You produce nothing, yet you still eat. You are useless. You don't plow, sow, fertilize, tend, or harvest." The Buddha responded, "Oh, but we do. We plow, sow, fertilize, tend, and harvest. Then where are your plows, your buffaloes, and your seeds? What crops do you tend? What crops do you harvest?" The Buddha answered, "We sow the seeds of faith in the earth of a true heart. Our plow is mindfulness and our buffalo is diligent practice. Our harvest is love and understanding. Sir, without faith, understanding, and love, life would be nothing but suffering." Bharadvaja found himself unexpectedly moved by the Buddha's words. He asked an attendant to bring the Buddha fragrant rice simmered in milk, but the Buddha refused by saying, "I have not shared these things with you in order to be given food. If you would like to make an offering, please do so at another time." The landowner was so impressed by this that he prostrated himself before the Buddha and asked to be accepted as a lay disciple. Svasti witnessed this take place firsthand. He understood how much he could learn by remaining close to the Buddha's side. He knew that of the several thousand bhikkhus in the Buddha's Sangha, few had the good fortune to be as close to the Buddha as he himself was. After the retreat season, the Buddha traveled northwest to spread the Dharma. He returned to Savatthi at the end of autumn. One morning when they were out begging, Rahula strayed from mindfulness. Although he continued to walk in file, his mind was elsewhere. He gazed at the Buddha ahead of him and wondered what the Buddha would have become if he had not followed the spiritual path. If he had become a mighty emperor, what would Rahula himself be now? Thinking such thoughts, Rahula forgot to observe his breathing and steps. Even though the Buddha could not see Rahula, he knew his son had lost his mindfulness. The Buddha stopped and turned around. The other bhikkhus came to a halt. The Buddha looked at Rahula and said, "Rahula, are you observing your breath and maintaining mindfulness?" Rahula lowered his head. The Buddha said, "To dwell in mindfulness, you must continue to observe your breath. We practice meditation even as we beg. Continue to meditate on the impermanent and non-self nature of the aggregates which comprise all beings. The 5 aggregates are the body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness. Observe your breath and thoughts, and your mind will not become dispersed." The Buddha turned back around and continued to walk. His words served as a reminder to all the bhikkhus to maintain their mindfulness. But a few steps after that, Rahula abandoned the line of bhikkhus and entered the forest, where he sat alone beneath a tree. Svasti followed him, but Rahula looked up at him and said, "Please go begging with the others. I don't have the heart to go begging right now. The Buddha corrected me before the entire community. I feel so ashamed, I'd rather sit here alone and meditate." Seeing he was unable to help his friend, Svasti rejoined the other bhikkhus. On the walk back to the monastery, Venerable Sariputta and Svasti stopped in the forest to invite Rahula to walk back with them. At the monastery, Svasti shared half of his food with Rahula, and when they finished eating, Sariputta told Rahula that the Buddha wished to see him. Svasti was permitted to accompany him. The Buddha understood that Rahula was ripe to receive certain teachings. He said, "Rahula, learn from the earth. Whether people spread pure and fragrant flowers, perfume, or fresh milk on it, or discard filthy and foul-smelling feces, urine, blood, mucus, and spit on it, the earth receives it all equally without clinging or aversion. When pleasant or unpleasant thoughts arise, don't let them entangle or enslave you. Learn from the water, Rahula. When people wash dirty things in it, the water is not sad or disdainful. Learn from fire. Fire burns all things without discrimination. It is not ashamed to burn impure substances. Learn from the air. The air carries all fragrances, whether sweet or foul. Rahula, practice loving-kindness to overcome anger. Loving-kindness has the capacity to bring happiness to others without demanding anything in return. Practice compassion to overcome cruelty. Compassion has the capacity to remove the suffering of others without expecting anything in return. Practice sympathetic joy to overcome hatred. Sympathetic joy arises when one rejoices over the happiness of others and wishes others well-being and success. Practice non-attachment to overcome prejudice. Non-attachment is the way of looking at all things openly and equally. This is because that is. That is because this is. Myself and other are not separate. Do not reject one thing only to chase after another. Rahula, loving-kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and non-attachment are beautiful and profound states of mind. I call them the four immeasurables. Practice them and you will become a refreshing source of vitality and happiness for others. Rahula, meditate on impermanence in order to break through the illusion of self. Meditate on the nature of the body's birth, development, and death in order to free yourself from desires. Practice observing your breath. Mindfulness of the breath brings great joy. Svasti was happy to be sitting next to Rahula, listening to all the Buddha had to say. Though Svasti had memorized sutras such as Turning the Wheel of Dharma and The Nature of Non-Self, he felt that he had never tasted the subtle flavor of the Dharma as deeply as today. Perhaps it was because he had not heard the other sutras spoken directly by the Buddha. The first sutra he had heard directly was the Sutra on Tending Water Buffaloes. But at that time he was not yet ripe enough to grasp many of its deeper meanings. He promised himself that during his free time he would recite all the sutras using his newly gained insight. That day, the Buddha also spent time teaching the two young men various methods of observing the breath. Though Svasti and Rahula had received similar instruction before, this was the first time they received it directly from the Buddha. The Buddha told them that the first fruit of mindfully observing the breath was overcoming dispersion and forgetfulness. Breathing in, you are aware that you are breathing in. Breathing out, you are aware that you are breathing out. During such moments of breathing practice, focus your mind on nothing but your breath. Useless and scattered thoughts will cease, allowing your mind to dwell in mindfulness. When you are aware of your breathing, you dwell in mindfulness. Dwelling in mindfulness, you cannot be led astray by any thoughts. With just one breath, you can attain awakening. That awakening is the Buddha nature that exists in all beings. Breathing in a short breath, you know that you are breathing in a short breath. Breathing out a long breath, you know that you are breathing out a long breath. Be totally aware of each breath. Mindfully observing your breathing will help you build concentration. With concentration, you will be able to look deeply into the nature of your body, feelings, mind, and the objects of mind which are called Sarvadharma. The Buddha had taught them wholeheartedly. His words were simple but profound. Svasti was confident that, thanks to this special session with the Buddha, he would find it easier to maintain mindfulness of breathing and therefore would be able to make greater progress in his practice. After bowing to the Buddha, Svasti and Rahula walked to the lake together. They repeated to each other all the things the Buddha had taught them in order to remember them well. Chapter 50. A handful of bran. The following year the Buddha spent the retreat season in Vajjanra with 500 bhikkhus. Sariputta and Moggallana served as his assistants. Halfway into the retreat season, drought hit the area, and the heat was almost unbearable. The Buddha spent most of each day beneath the refreshing shade of a nimba tree. He ate, gave Dharma talks, meditated, and slept beneath this same tree. By the beginning of the third month of retreat, the bhikkhus were receiving fewer and smaller food offerings. Food was scarce because of the drought, and even the food reserves maintained by the government for difficult times had dwindled to almost nothing. Many monks returned to the monastery with empty bowls. The Buddha himself often returned from begging with an empty bowl, and he filled his stomach with water to ease the hunger. The bhikkhus grew thin and wan. Venerable Moggallana suggested they all move south to Uttarakuru for the remaining days of the retreat, where food would be easier to find, but the Buddha refused, saying, "Moggallana, we are not the only ones suffering. All the local people, with the exception of a few wealthy households, are suffering from hunger. We should not abandon the people now. We have a chance to share and understand their suffering. We should remain here until the end of the retreat season." The wealthy merchant, Agnadatta, had invited the Buddha and his bhikkhus for the retreat season in Vajjanra, after he heard the Buddha teach. But he was away on business and had no idea of the situation back home. One day Moggallana pointed to a glade of healthy green trees and grasses growing near the monastery and said to the Buddha, "Teacher, I believe those plants have remained fresh and strong thanks to the rich nutrients in the soil. We could dig up some of that rich humus and mix it with water to make a nutritious food for the bhikkhus." The Buddha said, "It would not be correct to do so, Moggallana. In fact, I tried doing just that during my days of self-mortification on Dhangsiri mountain, but I noticed no nutritional benefits. Many living beings live in the soil protected from the heat of the sun. If we dig up the ground, many of those creatures will die, and plants will be killed also." Moggallana said no more. It had long been monastic custom for bhikkhus to place a portion of the food offerings they received into an empty receptacle set out to provide food for bhikkhus who did not receive adequate food offerings. Svasti noticed that in the past 10 days, the receptacle had remained empty of even a grain of rice or piece of chapati. Rahula privately confided to Svasti that although no bhikkhu was receiving adequate food, the people tended to offer food first to the elder bhikkhus. Younger bhikkhus received little or nothing. Svasti had noticed the same. He said, "Even on days when I receive a little food, I still feel hungry after I eat it. Is it the same for you?" Rahula nodded. He found it difficult to sleep at night because of his hunger. One day, after returning from begging, Venerable Ananda placed an earthenware pot on a 3-legged outdoor stove. He gathered some pieces of wood and began to build a fire. Svasti came to see what he was doing and offered to tend the fire. Svasti was more skilled at such matters, anyway. In no time at all, he had a fine fire blazing. Ananda lifted his begging bowl and poured something that looked like sawdust into the pot. He said, "This is bran. We can roast it until it is fragrant and then offer it to the Buddha." Svasti stirred the bran with 2 small sticks while Ananda told him how he met a horse merchant who had recently arrived in Vajjanra with 500 horses. Because the merchant saw the plight of the bhikkhus, he told Ananda that anytime the bhikkhus were unable to receive food offerings, they could come to his stables and he would offer each bhikkhu a handful of the bran he used to feed his horses. That day he offered 2 handfuls to Ananda, one meant for the Buddha. Ananda promised he would announce the merchant's generous offer to the other bhikkhus. The bran was soon toasted and fragrant. Ananda scooped it back into the begging bowl and invited Svasti to accompany him on the walk to the Nimba tree. Ananda offered the bran to the Buddha. The Buddha asked Svasti if he had received any food offerings, and Svasti showed him the sweet potato he had been lucky enough to receive. The Buddha invited them to sit down and eat with him. He lifted his bowl with great reverence. Svasti held his potato mindfully in his hand. As he watched the Buddha scoop up the bran and eat it with grateful appreciation, he felt like weeping. After the Dharma talk that day, Venerable Ananda told the community about the horse merchant's offer. Ananda asked them to visit the stables only when they had received no food offerings at all, as the bran was meant for the horses and he didn't want them to go hungry. That night beneath the moon, Sariputta paid a visit to the Buddha sitting beneath the Nimba tree. He said, "Lord, the way of awakening is so wondrous. It has the capacity to transform everyone who hears, understands, and practices it. Lord, how can we assure that the way will continue to be transmitted after you are gone?" Sariputta, if the bhikkhus grasp the true meaning of sutras and practice what the sutras teach, if they sincerely follow the precepts, the way of liberation will continue for centuries. Lord, great numbers of bhikkhus diligently memorize and recite the sutras. If future generations of monks continue to study and recite the teachings, your loving kindness and your insight will surely extend far into the future. Sariputta, transmitting the sutras is not enough. It is necessary to practice what is contained in the sutras. It is especially important to observe the precepts. Without that, the Dharma cannot last long. Without the precepts, the true Dharma would quickly fade. Is there a way of putting the precepts into a form that can be preserved for thousands of lives to come? That is not yet possible, Sariputta. A finished set of precepts cannot be created in one day or by one person. In the first years of the Sangha, we didn't have any precepts. Gradually, because of shortcomings and errors committed by brothers, we have created precepts. Now we have 120 precepts. That number will increase over time. The precepts are not yet complete, Sariputta. I believe the number may rise to 200 or more. The final day of the retreat arrived. The merchant Agnadatta returned from his travels and was shocked to learn how much the bhikkhus had suffered from hunger. He felt ashamed and organized a meal offering at his home. He also offered each bhikkhu a new robe. After the Buddha delivered his final talk of the season, the bhikkhus headed south. It was a lovely journey. The bhikkhus walked without haste. They rested nights and begged in the mornings. After their meal and a rest in the cool forests, they continued to walk each day. Sometimes they remained several days in a village where the people were especially delighted to receive the teaching. At night, the monks studied and recited the sutras before meditation and sleep. One afternoon, Svasti came across a group of young buffalo boys leading their buffaloes home. He stopped and talked to them, reminiscing about his own youth. Suddenly he was seized with a longing to see his family. He missed Rupak and Bala, and most of all, Bhima. He still wondered if it was proper for a bhikkhu to think about the family he had left. Of course, Rahula told him that he had missed his family too. Svasti was 22 years old. He preferred the company of younger people, feeling more at ease with them. He enjoyed time spent with Rahula the most. They often shared their innermost thoughts. Svasti told Rahula about his life as a buffalo boy. Rahula had never had an occasion to sit on a water buffalo's back. He had a hard time believing that so large a creature could be as docile as Svasti claimed. Svasti assured him that water buffaloes were the gentlest of animals. He told Rahula of the countless times he had lain on a buffalo's back as they walked home along the banks of the river. He would look up at the blue sky and drifting clouds, enjoying moments of peaceful leisure on the warm, smooth back of the buffalo. Svasti also told Rahula about the games he played with other buffalo boys. Rahula loved to hear these stories. It was a life he had never known, since he had been raised in a palace. Rahula said he wished he could experience riding on a buffalo's back, and Svasti promised him that he would somehow arrange it. Svasti wondered how he could arrange a buffalo ride for Rahula. They were both ordained monks. He decided that when they traveled in the vicinity of his home village, he would ask the Buddha's permission to go and see his family. He would ask if Rahula could join him. Then, when no one else was around, he would ask Rupak to let Rahula climb on the back of one of the buffaloes Rupak tended. Rahula could ride along the banks of the Naranjara river. Svasti planned to take off his monk's robe and ride on a buffalo too, just like in the old days. The next year, the Buddha spent the retreat season on the stony mountain Kalika. It was the 13th retreat season since the Buddha's enlightenment. Meghiya was serving as the Buddha's assistant. One day Meghiya confided to the Buddha that when he sat alone in the forest, he was disturbed by thoughts of desire and passion. He was concerned because the Buddha encouraged the bhikkhus to spend time alone in order to meditate, but whenever he meditated in solitude, he was confronted by mental obstacles. The Buddha told him that practicing in solitude did not mean to live without the support of friends. Wasting time in idle chatter and useless gossip with others was not beneficial to the spiritual life, but receiving the support of friends in one's practice was most important. Bhikkhus needed to live in communities to support and encourage each other. That was the meaning of taking refuge in the Sangha. The Buddha also told him, a bhikkhu requires 5 things. The first is understanding and virtuous friends who share the path. The second is precepts to help the bhikkhu maintain mindfulness. The third is ample opportunity to study the teaching. The fourth is diligence. And the fifth is understanding. The last 4 conditions are closely linked to and depend upon the presence of the first condition, having friends to practice with. Meghiya, practice the contemplations on death, compassion, impermanence, and the full awareness of breathing. To overcome desire, practice the contemplation on a corpse, looking deeply at the 9 stages of the body's decay from the time the breathing ceases to the time the bones turn to dust. To overcome anger and hatred, practice the contemplation on compassion. It illuminates the causes of anger and hatred within our own minds and in the minds of those who have precipitated it. To overcome craving, practice the contemplation on impermanence, illuminating the birth and death of all things. To overcome confusion and dispersion, practice the contemplation on the full awareness of breathing. If you regularly practice these 4 contemplations, you will attain liberation and enlightenment.